At 11:32 on the morning of December 20th, 1943, a 20-pound cannon shell exploded directly in front of Second Lieutenant Charlie Brown's cockpit, shattering the plexiglass nose of his B-17 bomber and flooding the aircraft with 60 below zero air, screaming at 150 miles per hour. The number 2 engine died instantly. German fighters swarmed like wolves. And this 21-year-old pilot with 0 combat missions was about to experience something so impossible that the U.S. military would classify it for 46 years. By the end of this story, 9 American lives would be saved by the one man who should have killed them. A German ace who gave up his Knight's Cross, risked execution by firing squad, and became a brother for life to the enemy he refused to destroy. But first, Charlie Brown had to survive the next 10 minutes of hell. December 1943. The Allied bombing campaign over Germany was a meat grinder. American B-17 bombers flew into walls of flak and swarms of Luftwaffe fighters. Entire formations were wiped out before reaching their targets. The average life expectancy of a bomber crew was 11 missions. Most never made it past 5. The 379th Bombardment Group, based at RAF Kimbolton in England, had been bleeding crews for months. Every morning, young men climbed into their aircraft, knowing the odds were against them. Every evening, empty bunks told the story of who didn't make it back. The worst position in any bomber formation had a name that everyone feared: Purple Heart Corner. It was the edge slot where German fighters always attacked first, because defensive fire from neighboring bombers couldn't overlap effectively. Flying Purple Heart Corner was practically a death sentence. New crews got assigned there. The veterans called it feeding fresh meat to the wolves. Charlie Brown's crew was the newest of all. They had arrived at Kimbolton just days earlier. 10 young men who had trained together in the United States, who trusted each other with their lives, who had no idea what real combat looked like. Brown was their pilot and aircraft commander. At 21 years old, from Weston, West Virginia, he looked like he should still be in college. His co-pilot, Spencer Luke, was equally inexperienced. Their aircraft was a B-17F Flying Fortress, nicknamed Ye Old Pub. The name came from a bar Brown's crew had frequented during training. Someone had painted a cartoon character drinking beer on the nose. It seemed funny back then. Now, as Brown sat through the morning briefing on December 20th, nothing seemed funny anymore. The intelligence officer pointed at a map of northern Germany. The target was a Focke-Wulf 190 fighter factory on the outskirts of Bremen. The factory was cranking out the most lethal fighters in the Luftwaffe arsenal. Destroying it would save Allied lives. But getting there would cost lives first. The briefing officer warned them to expect hundreds of German fighters. He warned them about the flak batteries protecting Bremen. He warned them about the winter weather that could kill them just as surely as enemy fire. What he didn't mention was that Ye Old Pub had been assigned to Purple Heart Corner. Brown found out when he checked the formation chart. His stomach dropped. His bombardier, Andy Jensen, looked at him with wide eyes. His navigator, George Starks, swallowed hard. Every man on that crew knew what Purple Heart Corner meant. But orders were orders. At 0930 hours, the engines of Ye Old Pub roared to life. Brown went through his pre-flight checks with mechanical precision. Everything had to be perfect. Any mechanical failure over Germany meant certain death. The bomber lumbered down the runway carrying 10 men, 6,000 pounds of bombs, and enough .50 caliber ammunition to fight off a small army. The aircraft lifted off and joined the formation. Hundreds of B-17s assembled over England in a precisely choreographed aerial ballet. Each bomber took its assigned position. Brown guided Ye Old Pub to the edge, Purple Heart Corner. The formation turned east, toward Germany. Charlie Brown had dreamed of being a pilot since he was a kid in West Virginia. He had grown up reading about World War I aces like Eddie Rickenbacker. He had built model airplanes and imagined himself in aerial combat. The reality was nothing like his imagination. As the formation crossed the English coast and headed over the North Sea, Brown felt his hands trembling on the controls. This was real. In a few hours, people would try to kill him. He might never see West Virginia again. Beside him, Spencer Luke was equally terrified, but trying not to show it. Behind them in the fuselage, their crew was doing the same. Bombardier Andy Jensen in the nose, navigator George Starks beside him, radio operator Richard Pachout at his station, top turret gunner Bertram Coulombe watching the sky above, ball turret gunner Sam Blackford hanging beneath the aircraft in his glass sphere, waist gunners Alex Yelisenko and Pinky Lloyd at their positions, and in the tail, Hugh Eckenrode, manning the guns that protected their 6 o'clock. None of them had ever faced combat. All of them were about to get a brutal education. The formation reached the German coast. Anti-aircraft fire began immediately. Black puffs of smoke appeared in the sky like deadly flowers. Each puff represented thousands of metal fragments flying at supersonic speed. One direct hit could tear a bomber apart. Brown watched the flak getting closer. The German gunners were good. They were tracking the formation, adjusting their aim, walking their fire into the bomber stream. An explosion rocked the aircraft next to Ye Old Pub. Brown saw pieces of the bomber falling away. He saw parachutes opening. Then he saw parachutes that didn't open, men falling like stones from 25,000 feet. He forced himself to look away. He had to focus on flying. He had to keep his crew alive. The formation pressed deeper into Germany. The flak intensified. Then the fighters arrived. German pilots had been tracking the American bombers on radar since they crossed the coast. Now they struck with precision and fury. Messerschmitt Bf-109s and Focke-Wulf 190s dove through the formation from above. Their cannon and machine guns tore into the bombers. B-17s began falling from the sky in flames. Brown watched a bomber directly ahead take a 20-millimeter cannon shell through the cockpit. The aircraft rolled inverted and began its death spiral. No parachutes emerged. The crew was dead before they knew what hit them. Another bomber lost an engine and fell behind the formation. German fighters swarmed it immediately. Within seconds, it was a ball of fire. Ye Old Pub pressed on. They were approaching Bremen. The factory target was visible ahead through broken clouds. Brown prepared for the bomb run. This was the most dangerous part of any mission. For several minutes, the bomber had to fly straight and level, no evasive maneuvers. The bombardier needed stable conditions to aim. During this window, the aircraft was a sitting duck. Andy Jensen lay prone in the nose, his eye pressed to the Norden bomb site. He was tracking the target, making tiny adjustments, waiting for the perfect moment. Brown held the aircraft steady, despite every instinct screaming at him to maneuver, to dodge, to do anything except fly straight into the flak. The anti-aircraft fire was murderous. Bremen was one of the most heavily defended cities in Germany. The gun crews below were not ordinary soldiers. They were officer candidate school trainees, elite marksmen, the best the Luftwaffe had. And they had been waiting all morning for the American bombers. The sky around Ye Old Pub filled with black smoke. Each explosion shook the aircraft. Shrapnel rattled against the fuselage like hail on a tin roof. Brown could smell cordite and high explosive even through his oxygen mask. Then, at exactly 11:32 a.m., one of those 250 flak guns scored a direct hit. The 20-pound shell exploded 6 feet in front of the cockpit. The blast wave hit Brown like a physical punch. The plexiglass nose shattered into 1,000 pieces. The wind roared in at 60 degrees below zero and 150 miles per hour. Brown couldn't see, couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Ice crystals formed instantly on every surface. The temperature in the cockpit dropped from barely tolerable to lethal in seconds. The number 2 engine took shrapnel and died. Oil pressure dropped to zero. The propeller windmilled uselessly. Brown feathered it to reduce drag. The number 4 engine began overspeeding from the loss of its governor. Brown had to throttle it back to prevent it from tearing itself apart. Ye Old Pub slowed. The formation pulled ahead. Within seconds, the bomber was alone. Brown knew what came next. German fighter pilots watched every formation like predators studying a herd. They looked for the weak, the wounded, the stragglers. A B-17 alone was a B-17 dead. The fighters dove immediately. 12 to 15 Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs descended on Ye Old Pub like sharks sensing blood in the water. They came from every angle, high, low, head-on, tail-on. Their 20-millimeter cannons and 13-millimeter machine guns opened fire simultaneously. The noise was deafening. Bertram Colomb in the top turret began firing. His twin 50-caliber machine guns hammered out rounds at 800 rounds per minute. Tracers streaked across the sky. He scored hits on a Bf-109, saw pieces flying off its wing, watched it roll away trailing smoke. But there were too many. The German pilots were experienced. They knew exactly where to aim. They targeted the engines, the fuel tanks, the control surfaces, everything that kept the bomber flying. The number 3 engine took hits. Power dropped to half. Brown could feel the aircraft losing altitude. Spencer Luke was firing the nose guns, swinging them from target to target. In the tail, Hugh Eckenrode was fighting desperately to keep the German fighters off their 6. The waist gunners were firing at anything that moved. But the cold was defeating them. At 27,000 feet, the gun oil had frozen. The mechanisms jammed. Of the 11 machine guns mounted on Ye Old Pub, only 3 still worked. The German fighters kept coming. A Focke-Wulf 190 made a head-on pass. Its 4 20-millimeter cannons opened fire. Shells walked up the nose of the bomber. Andy Jensen felt rounds passing within inches of his head. The Norden bomb sight exploded. Glass and metal fragments filled the nose compartment. Then came the hit that changed everything. A 20-millimeter shell penetrated the tail section and exploded directly behind Hugh Eckenrode. The young tail gunner from Pennsylvania never knew what killed him. One moment he was firing at a Bf-109. The next moment he was gone. His body slumped over his guns, frozen blood already forming icicles in the sub-zero air. The oxygen system was next. A burst of machine gun fire severed the main oxygen line. Pure oxygen vented into the aircraft at high pressure. At 27,000 feet, humans cannot survive without supplemental oxygen. The human brain needs oxygen to function. Deprive it, and consciousness fails within seconds. Brown felt the warning signs immediately. His vision narrowed to a tunnel. His hands went numb in the controls. Beside him, Spencer Luke slumped forward, unconscious. In the back, crew members were passing out one by one. George Starks tried to activate the emergency oxygen bottles. His hands wouldn't respond. Richard Petchout reached for his portable oxygen tank. Too late. The darkness took him. Charlie Brown's last conscious thought was that he had failed. His crew was going to die on their first mission. He had led them straight into a slaughter. Then he blacked out. Ye Old Pub, now pilotless, began to fall. The bomber dropped from 27,000 feet in an uncontrolled dive. The airspeed climbed past 250 miles per hour, past 275, past 300. The airframe shook violently. Rivets popped. Metal groaned. At any moment, the wings could tear off from the aerodynamic stress. The German fighters pulled away. They assumed the bomber was finished. They had seen this before. A diving B-17 meant dead men inside. They turned to find new targets. But something impossible was about to happen. At approximately 1,000 feet above the ground, Charlie Brown opened his eyes. The thicker air at low altitude contained enough oxygen to revive him. His brain rebooted like a computer coming back online. He saw the ground rushing up at him at 300 miles per hour. He saw trees and fields and a German village. He was about to die. Everyone was about to die. Unless Brown grabbed the controls and pulled back with every ounce of strength in his body. The control yoke fought him. The aircraft didn't want to respond. The airspeed was too high. The control surfaces were damaged. But Brown refused to quit. He pulled harder. The muscles in his arms screamed. The bomber began to level out. 500 feet. 300 feet. 100 feet. Ye Old Pub leveled out just above the treetops of northern Germany. The wings flexed. The fuselage groaned. But the aircraft held together. Brown was gasping for air. His heart hammered against his ribs. He looked around the cockpit and saw a scene from hell. Blood everywhere. Spencer Luke unconscious beside him. The instrument panel shattered. Wind howling through the broken nose at 150 miles per hour. Behind him, his crew was wounded and dying. And he had just flown directly over a German fighter airfield. On that airfield, a 28-year-old Luftwaffe pilot named Franz Stigler was refueling his Messerschmitt Bf-109. He had already shot down 2 American bombers that morning. One more kill would earn him the Knight's Cross, one of Germany's highest military honors. He looked up and saw Ye Old Pub limping across the sky at barely 100 feet above the ground. A crippled B-17, alone, defenseless. The easiest kill of his career. Stigler climbed into his fighter, started the engine, and took off in pursuit. Franz Stigler was closing fast on the crippled B-17. His finger rested on the trigger. One squeeze would earn him the Knight's Cross. One more kill to honor his dead brother. But what he saw through his gun sight would make him commit an act of treason that could get him executed. In Fun Mot, Charlie Brown survived impossible odds. His bomber was shredded. His crew was dying. And now a German ace with 27 kills was hunting him. Here's what nobody expected. Stigler had 487 combat missions under his belt. He had been shot down 17 times. He knew how to kill. But the code drilled into him by his commander, Gustav Rodel, was about to override everything the Nazi war machine demanded. Never shoot a man in a parachute, Rodel had said. That's murder, not combat. And as Stigler pulled alongside Ye Old Pub and saw the devastation inside, he realized these Americans weren't fighting anymore. They were just trying to survive. Shooting them would be murder. And everything Franz Stigler believed in was about to collide with everything the Third Reich expected. Stigler positioned his Messerschmitt behind the B-17's tail, standard attack angle. His twin machine guns and 20mm cannon were loaded and ready. Through his gun sight, he could see the tail gunner's position. The compartment was destroyed, massive holes torn through the fuselage. And through those holes, Stigler saw something that stopped his finger on the trigger. A young American slumped over his guns, blood frozen in long red icicles hanging from the shattered turret. The man was clearly dead. Stigler had killed many enemy pilots, but he had never executed a defenseless crew. He pulled his fighter alongside the bomber's waist section. More holes, more devastation. He could see wounded men inside, trying to help other wounded men. A crewman with blood covering his face. Another with his leg torn open. None of them were firing. None of them could fight. The bomber itself was a flying wreck. The nose was completely shattered. Wind screamed through at 150 miles per hour. 2 engines were damaged. The tail section looked like it had been through a shredder. This aircraft should not still be flying. And yet somehow, impossibly, it was. Stigler moved up to the cockpit level. Through the shattered plexiglass, he saw the pilot and co-pilot. The co-pilot was unconscious, slumped forward in his harness. The pilot was covered in blood, struggling with the controls, clearly wounded. The young American's eyes met Stigler's through the broken window. The terror in those eyes was absolute. The American expected to die in the next 3 seconds. Franz Stigler was not a Nazi. He had joined the Luftwaffe in 1935 as a commercial pilot. Before the war, he had flown passengers across Europe for Lufthansa in peace. He had never wanted to kill anyone. But Germany had called, and duty had answered. His brother August had died in 1940 when his Junkers 88 crashed during a night bombing mission over England. The war had taken everything from Franz, except his skill and his code. That code came from Gustav Rodel, his former commanding officer in North Africa. Rodel had commanded Jagdgeschwader 27 in the Libyan desert. He was different from other German officers. He believed war had rules. He believed honor mattered more than kill counts. Rodel had gathered his pilots one day and told them something Franz never forgot. "You are fighter pilots first, last, always. If I ever hear of any of you shooting at a man in a parachute, I will shoot you myself." The meaning was crystal clear. A man in a parachute was defenseless. Killing him was murder. And murder had no place in the code of a true fighter pilot. Now Franz looked at the shattered B-17 beside him. These Americans weren't in parachutes, but they might as well have been. No working guns, no speed, no way to defend themselves. They were defenseless. Shooting them down would not be a victory. It would be an execution. Franz felt the weight of his rosary beads in his flight jacket pocket. His mother had wanted him to become a priest. He had chosen to fly instead. But he had never abandoned his faith. And his faith told him that killing these men would be a mortal sin. Franz made his decision. He would not shoot down this bomber. He would not kill these defenseless men. He would not earn his Knight's Cross this way. But refusing to kill them created a bigger problem. The American bomber was flying west, deeper into Germany. Wrong direction. If Brown continued this course, he would fly over more German airfields, more anti-aircraft batteries, more fighter squadrons. Someone else would shoot him down within minutes. The crew would die anyway. Franz had spared them, but sparing was not the same as saving. He needed to do something impossible. He needed to guide them to safety. But how do you communicate with an enemy pilot at 100 feet altitude when you're flying a fighter jet and he's flying a dying bomber? Franz pulled his Messerschmitt alongside the B-17's cockpit. Close formation, wingtip to wingtip. He could see the American pilot staring at him, frozen in terror. Franz raised his hand and pointed down toward the ground. He was trying to signal, "Land at a German airfield and surrender. It's your only chance to survive." But Charlie Brown did not understand. He thought the German was ordering him to crash and die. Brown shook his head violently. Number Franz tried again. This time, he pointed north, towards Sweden. Neutral territory. If the Americans could reach Sweden, they would be interned, but alive. Medical treatment would be waiting. Brown still didn't understand. The young American pilot was in shock, wounded, traumatized. He kept flying west, toward England. 250 miles across the North Sea in a bomber that was falling apart. Franz realized he had only one option left, and it was an option that would get him executed if anyone found out. He would escort the American bomber through German airspace to the coast. In Nazi Germany, this was high treason. The Luftwaffe had clear regulations. Any German pilot who allowed an enemy aircraft to escape faced immediate court-martial. The sentence was death by firing squad. No trial, no defense, no appeal. Franz knew exactly what he was risking. His career, his life, his honor in the eyes of the Reich. But he looked at the young American pilot again and saw himself 5 years earlier, before the war, before the killing. Just a young man trying to survive. Franz made the most dangerous decision of his life. He maneuvered his Messerschmitt into close formation on the left wing of the B-17. So close that their wingtips were separated by just a few feet. So close that from the ground, the two aircraft would appear as one silhouette. This was his plan. The Luftwaffe operated captured B-17s for training and reconnaissance missions. German anti-aircraft crews were trained to recognize these aircraft when escorted by friendly fighters. If they saw a Bf-109 flying in tight formation with an American bomber, they might assume it was a captured plane being delivered to a test facility. They might hold their fire. It was a desperate gamble based on a thin assumption, but it was the only chance these Americans had. Inside Ye Olde Pub, Charlie Brown watched the German fighter slide into position beside him. His mind couldn't process what was happening. German fighters don't escort American bombers. They destroy them. Was this some kind of psychological torture? Was the German radioing for reinforcements? Was he herding them into a trap? Brown glanced at his top turret gunner, Bertram Coulomb. Coulomb had the German fighter in his sights. His twin 50 caliber guns could shred the Messerschmitt at this range. "Don't fire," Brown ordered over the intercom. "Just aim at him. If he makes a move, kill him." The B-17 continued west, mile after mile. The Germans stayed in formation. They passed over farmland. They passed over villages with church steeples and cobblestone streets. They passed over roads filled with German military convoys. At any moment, someone on the ground could look up and realize something was wrong. At any moment, a flak battery could open fire. At any moment, another German fighter could appear and demand to know why Franz Stigler was escorting an enemy bomber instead of destroying it. But the minutes kept passing, and Franz kept flying beside them. His presence was protecting them. Every German soldier who looked up saw a Bf-109, friendly aircraft. They assumed the bomber was captured or friendly. They held their fire. The coastline appeared ahead, the North Sea, gray and cold and impossibly vast. 250 miles of freezing water between Germany and England. If Ye Olde Pub could cross that distance, the crew would live. If the engines failed over the open ocean, they would die within minutes in the freezing water. But first, they had to pass the coastal defenses. The Atlantic Wall stretched along the entire coastline of occupied Europe. Hitler had ordered it built to repel any Allied invasion. Anti-aircraft batteries, radar stations, observer posts, searchlight positions. Every mile of beach was watched. Every aircraft that crossed the coast was tracked and identified. An American bomber flying low and slow would be the easiest target those gunners would see all week. Franz stayed in formation. He flew so close to the B-17 that his wingtip nearly touched the bomber's fuselage. He was putting his life on the line. If the flak batteries opened fire at the bomber, they would hit him too. If they recognized his aircraft as friendly, they would hold fire on both planes. The coastal batteries tracked them. Radar operators watched their approach. Gun crews stood ready. But they saw a German fighter in tight formation with what appeared to be a captured bomber. The guns stayed silent. Ye Old Pub crossed over the beach and headed out over the gray waters of the North Sea. Franz had done it. He had escorted an enemy bomber through the most heavily defended airspace in Europe. He had saved 9 American lives. But Franz could not follow them to England. His fuel gauge showed critical levels. The bullet lodged in his radiator earlier that morning meant his engine could overheat at any moment. And if he landed in Britain, he would spend the rest of the war as a prisoner. Franz pulled his fighter alongside the B-17's cockpit one last time. Charlie Brown was staring at him through the shattered window. Their eyes met. 2 young men from opposite sides of a terrible war, separated by a few feet of frozen air, connected by a moment of humanity that neither would ever forget. Franz raised his hand to his forehead in a slow, deliberate salute. A fighter pilot's salute. A gesture of respect between warriors. Then he banked his Messerschmitt hard to the left and disappeared into the gray German sky, heading back toward his airfield. Charlie Brown watched him go. He still didn't understand what had just happened. He didn't know the German's name. He didn't know why he had been spared. All he knew was that a man who should have killed him had chosen to let him live, and that choice had saved 9 men. But Brown's ordeal was far from over. He was now 250 miles from England in an aircraft that was barely flying. 1 man was dead. 6 were wounded. The morphine had frozen solid. 3 engines were damaged. The hydraulic system was destroyed. And the North Sea in December was one of the most unforgiving environments on Earth. Charlie Brown flew his dying bomber into the void. Below him, waves churned in the December cold. Water temperature was barely above freezing. If Ye Old Pub went down, the crew would have 3 minutes before hypothermia killed them. Maybe 5 if they were lucky. The number 2 engine was completely dead. The number 3 engine was producing half power. The number 4 engine kept surging and fading. Only the number 1 engine was running at full capacity. Brown needed at least 2 good engines to maintain altitude. He was flying on 1.5. The airspeed indicator showed 140 miles per hour. Dangerously slow. Any slower, and the bomber would stall and fall into the sea. Behind him, his crew was fighting to stay alive. Alex Yelisenko had taken shrapnel in his leg. The wound was severe. Without morphine or proper treatment, he would bleed to death. His crewmates packed the wound and applied pressure. That was all they could do. Sam Blackford in the ball turret had lost all feeling in his feet. The electrical heating in his flight suit had failed. Frostbite was setting in fast. If he didn't get warm soon, he would lose his toes, maybe his feet, maybe his legs. Richard Petchout had taken a shell fragment to his eye. He could barely see. But he kept working, trying to repair the damaged radio so they could call for help. Every few minutes, he tapped out a distress signal. No response ever came. In the tail section, Hugh Eckenrode's body remained where he had died. There was no way to move him. The other crew members had wrapped him in a blanket. That was all they could do. The living had to focus on staying alive. Brown calculated the distance. 250 miles at 140 miles per hour. Nearly 2 hours of flight time. 2 hours in an aircraft that could disintegrate at any moment. 2 hours over water so cold it would kill them in 3 minutes. He didn't know if they would make it, but he knew they had to try. Mile after mile, the B-17 limped westward. The engines coughed and sputtered. The airframe groaned under stress. Brown's hands ached from gripping the controls. His shoulder throbbed where the bullet fragment had hit him, but he did not let go. He could not let go. 9 lives depended on him. 8 still breathing. 1 already gone. After what felt like an eternity, the coast of England appeared on the horizon. Brown had never seen anything more beautiful. Green fields, gray cliffs, home. But Ye Old Pub was too damaged to reach its home base at RAF Kimbolton. The hydraulic system was destroyed, which meant the landing gear might not extend. The flaps might not work. Brown would have to bring the bomber down wherever he could find a runway. He spotted RAF Seething, home of the 448th Bomb Group. He lined up for approach. The landing gear came down, barely. The flaps extended partially. Brown brought Ye Old Pub toward the runway, in what could only be described as a controlled crash. The bomber hit hard. The remaining landing gear collapsed. The aircraft skidded across the tarmac in a shower of sparks and screaming metal. When it finally stopped, Charlie Brown sat motionless in the cockpit. His hands were still locked on the controls. His body was shaking uncontrollably. He had done it. He had brought his crew home. 8 men climbed out of Ye Old Pub alive. 1 was carried out in a body bag. The bomber itself would never fly again. Engineers examined it and declared it unflyable. It was sent back to the United States and sold for scrap metal. At the debriefing, Brown told his intelligence officers everything. The attack over Bremen, the dying bomber, the German fighter that appeared beside them, the escort through German airspace, the salute before the German turned away. The officers listened in complete silence. When Brown finished, they gave him a direct order. He was never to speak of this incident again. The story was classified top secret. No one could know that a German pilot had shown mercy to an American crew. It would create sympathy for the enemy. It would complicate propaganda efforts. It could affect morale. Brown obeyed the order. He kept the secret locked inside. He never told his parents. He never told his friends. For decades, he carried the memory alone. 300 miles away, in Germany, Franz Stigler landed his Messerschmitt at his airfield near Bremen. His fuel tanks were nearly empty. His engine was overheating from the damaged radiator. He climbed out of the cockpit exhausted. His crew chief asked about his mission. "Engine trouble," Franz said. "Had to return early." He told no one what he had done. If anyone discovered he had escorted an enemy bomber to safety instead of destroying it, he would be arrested immediately. The Gestapo would interrogate him. A military tribunal would convict him. A firing squad would execute him. Franz kept the secret too. He never told his fellow pilots. He never told his commanding officer. He carried the memory alone. 2 men on opposite sides of a war, each carrying a story they could never tell. Each wondering if the other had survived. Each haunted by a moment of humanity in the midst of mechanized slaughter. The secret would last for 46 years, and when it finally came to light, It would prove that even in humanity's darkest hour, compassion could survive. But that revelation was still decades away. In the next chapter of this story, both men would fight to survive the rest of the war. The choices they made on December 20th, 1943, would haunt them both. And the question that would consume Charlie Brown for nearly half a century was simple. Who was the German pilot who saved my life? The war ended in May 1945. Charlie Brown went home to West Virginia. Franz Stigler survived, but lost everything. For 46 years, both men carried a secret they could never tell. Brown wondered who saved him. Stigler wondered if the Americans survived. Neither knew the other's name. Neither could speak about December 20th, 1943. The memory haunted them both. The question consumed Brown. Who was the German pilot? And when the answer finally came in 1990, it would prove that mercy can echo across half a century. But first, both men had to survive the rest of the war. And that survival would cost them everything they had left. Charlie Brown returned to combat in February 1944. The U.S. Army Air Force had a rule: complete 25 missions and go home. Brown had completed 1. He needed 24 more. But the debriefing officers had given him strict orders. Never speak about the German pilot who spared him. The incident was classified. Brown obeyed. He climbed back into B-17 bombers and flew into German airspace again and again. Every mission, he wondered if he would encounter the same German fighter. Every mission, he looked for that distinctive Messerschmitt. He never saw it. Brown completed his 25 missions by June 1944. He survived. But the memory of December 20th never left him. He could still see the German pilot's face through the shattered cockpit window. He could still see the salute before the fighter turned away. Who was that man? Why had he shown mercy? Brown would spend the next 46 years searching for answers. He went home to West Virginia and tried to resume normal life. He enrolled in college to finish his degree. He tried to forget the war. But you cannot forget the man who saved your life. Franz Stigler's war got worse. Much worse. By early 1944, the Luftwaffe was losing. Allied bombers were destroying German cities. Allied fighters were winning air superiority. German pilots were dying faster than they could be replaced. Stigler had been transferred to Jagdgeschwader 7, one of the first units to fly the revolutionary Messerschmitt Me-262 jet fighter. The Me-262 was the world's first operational jet-powered fighter aircraft. It was 100 miles per hour faster than any Allied fighter. Its 4 30mm cannons could shred a B-17 in seconds. It was a technological marvel, but it arrived too late to change the war. Stigler flew the Me-262 in combat. He shot down Allied bombers. He watched his friends die. The Luftwaffe was collapsing. Germany was collapsing. Everything Franz had fought for was turning to ash. On April 30th, 1945, Adolf Hitler committed suicide in his Berlin bunker. 1 week later, Germany surrendered unconditionally. The Third Reich was dead. The Luftwaffe ceased to exist. And Franz Stigler found himself in a destroyed country with no future. He had survived 487 combat missions. He had been shot down 17 times. He had lost his brother. He had lost his country, and he carried a secret that he could never tell. Post-war Germany was hell. Cities were rubble. The economy was destroyed. Millions were homeless. The Allies occupied the country and divided it into zones. Franz tried to rebuild his life. He had been a commercial pilot before the war, but airlines were not hiring former Luftwaffe pilots. The stigma was too great. He struggled to find work. He took odd jobs. He barely survived. In 1953, Franz made a decision that would change his life. He emigrated to Canada, Vancouver, British Columbia. A new country, a fresh start, a chance to leave the war behind. Franz arrived in Vancouver with almost nothing. No money, no connections, no English. But he had his skills as a pilot and engineer. He started working in the aircraft industry. He slowly built a new life. He became a successful businessman. He married. He had a family. He became a Canadian citizen. On the outside, Franz Stigler looked like a man who had moved on. But inside, he still carried the memory of December 20th, 1943. He wondered if the American bomber had made it home. He wondered if the crew had survived. He wondered if his decision to show mercy had mattered. But he could never ask anyone. He could never tell anyone. The secret stayed locked inside. Charlie Brown rebuilt his life too. He finished college. Then, in 1949, he made a surprising decision. He rejoined the United States Air Force. The Air Force had been created as a separate branch in 1947. Brown wanted to continue serving, but this time not as a pilot, as an intelligence officer. Brown rose through the ranks. He served during the Korean War. He served during the Cold War. He traveled the world analyzing threats and gathering intelligence. He retired in 1972 as a lieutenant colonel. A successful career, a good life. But the memory of the German pilot never left him. Brown settled in Miami, Florida. He started a combustion research company. He became a businessman. He had money. He had respect. He had survived. But he still didn't have answers. Who was the German pilot? For decades, Brown kept the secret. The military had ordered him to stay silent. He obeyed. But in 1986, something changed. Brown was invited to speak at a military aviation event called The Gathering of Eagles at Maxwell Air Force Base in Alabama. Retired pilots from all branches attended. War stories were shared. Friendships were renewed. Someone asked Brown if he had any memorable combat stories. For the first time in 43 years, Charlie Brown told the story. He described the mission to Bremen. He described the attack that shredded his bomber. He described the German fighter that appeared beside him. He described the escort through German airspace. He described the salute before the German turned away. The audience listened in absolute silence. You could have heard a pin drop. When Brown finished, the room exploded with questions. How did you survive? Why didn't the Germans shoot? Did you ever find out who he was? Brown admitted he had no answers. He had been searching for decades. He had contacted the U.S. Air Force Archives. No records. He had contacted the West German Air Force. No records. He had written letters to military historians across Europe. No responses. The German pilot seemed to have vanished into history. But something changed that day in 1986. Brown realized he needed to find this man. He needed to know what happened. He needed to say thank you. The search intensified. Brown spent the next 4 years searching. He wrote hundreds of letters. He contacted every German aviation organization he could find. He tracked down former Luftwaffe pilots and asked if they knew anything. Nothing. Every lead went cold. Every contact came up empty. His friends told him to give up. The pilot was probably dead. Even if he was alive, finding one man among millions of German veterans was impossible. 46 years had passed. Too much time. Too little information. But Brown refused to quit. In 1989, he wrote one final letter. He sent it to a newsletter for former Luftwaffe pilots called Jägerblatt. He described the encounter in precise detail: the date, the location, the aircraft types, the damage to his bomber, the escort through German airspace. He asked if anyone knew who the German pilot might have been. The letter was published in early 1990. Brown had given up hope of a response. He had tried everything. This was his last attempt. Then one morning in February 1990, Brown received an envelope. Canadian postmark, Vancouver, British Columbia. Inside was a single sheet of paper covered in careful handwriting. The letter began with 3 words that changed everything. I was the one. Franz Stigler had read the newsletter. Someone had mailed it to him. He had recognized the story immediately. Every detail matched his memory exactly. The date, the location, the shattered B-17, the escort to the coast, the salute. After 46 years of silence, Franz had finally learned that the American bomber had made it home. The crew had survived. His decision to spare them had not been in vain. Brown read the letter with tears streaming down his face. Franz described his aircraft. He described seeing the dead tail gunner. He described the decision not to shoot. He described the escort over the coastal defenses. He described the salute. Every single detail matched Brown's memory exactly. There was no doubt. This was the man who had saved his life. Brown's hands were shaking as he dialed directory assistance for Vancouver, British Columbia. I need a number for Franz Stigler, he said. The operator found it. Brown dialed with trembling fingers. An old man with a German accent answered. Franz Stigler? Brown asked. Yes? This is Charlie Brown. I was the pilot of the B-17 you escorted over Germany in 1943. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then Franz Stigler began to cry. 2 old men, separated by 2,000 miles, wept together over a telephone connection. They talked for hours. They discovered they had lived less than 200 miles apart for years. Franz in Vancouver, Brown in Seattle, before he moved to Miami. They had been neighbors and never known it. They agreed to meet in person. A hotel lobby in Florida, summer of 1990. 2 enemies from a war that ended 45 years ago. 2 old men who had carried the same secret for 46 years. Finally, about to see each other face to face. On a summer day in 1990, Charlie Brown walked into that hotel lobby. He was 67 years old. His hair was gray. His body carried the scars of war. But his heart was pounding like he was 21 again. Franz Stigler was waiting. He was 74 years old. His face was lined with age. His hands trembled slightly. But his eyes were the same eyes that had looked across at Brown through the shattered cockpit window in 1943. They saw each other across the lobby. For a moment, neither moved. Then they walked toward each other and embraced. 2 old men, holding each other and weeping. Their shoulders shook. Their voices broke. They did not let go for a long time. A friend had brought a video camera. The footage shows something extraordinary. Not 2 enemies reuniting. 2 brothers finding each other after half a century. When they finally separated, Franz looked at Brown with tears in his eyes. "I had to know," Franz said. "I had to know if you made it home." Brown had brought photographs, not just of himself, but of his children, his grandchildren, all the people who existed because Franz had lifted his finger from the trigger in 1943. Franz stared at the photographs. His tears came harder. He had given up his Knight's Cross to save 9 American lives. Now he was looking at 3 generations of a family that lived because of him. "I never received my Knight's Cross," Franz said quietly, "but I received something better." Brown understood. They had both received something that no medal could represent. 3 months later, in September 1990, Brown and Franz attended a reunion of the 379th Bomb Group in Massachusetts. The veterans of Brown's old unit invited Franz as their guest of honor. They wanted to meet the German pilot who had saved one of their own. 2 surviving crew members from Ye Old Pub were there. Sam Blackford, the ball turret gunner. Richard Pechout, the radio operator. Both men had lived full lives after the war. Both had children and grandchildren. They embraced Franz with tears and laughter. They thanked him for the decades they had been given. They introduced him to their families. 25 people stood in that room who would never have been born if Franz had pulled the trigger. The reunion made Franz an honorary member of the 379th Bomb Group, a German fighter ace officially welcomed into an American bomber unit. Former enemies, now brothers. Word of the story spread. Newspapers picked it up. Television stations requested interviews. Brown and Franz found themselves invited to speak at air museums, military gatherings, and civic organizations across North America. They traveled together whenever possible. The American bomber pilot and the German fighter ace standing side by side, telling their story to audiences who had never heard anything like it. Veterans in the crowds would weep openly. Young people would approach them afterward, shaking their hands, thanking them for sharing something so powerful. The story resonated because it proved something important. Even in total war, even when nations demanded absolute hatred, individual human beings could choose a different path. Franz gave Brown a book about German fighter jets. Inside the front cover, he wrote an inscription. He explained that in 1940, he had lost his only brother to the war. He wrote that on December 20th, 1943, 4 days before Christmas, he had been given the chance to save a B-17 from destruction. He wrote that Charlie Brown had become as precious to him as his brother had been. He signed it, "Your brother, Franz." They were no longer just friends. They were family. They talked on the phone every week. They visited each other's homes. They went fishing together. They celebrated holidays together. The bond between them was deeper than anything either man had experienced since the war. Their story reached audiences around the world. In 2008, the United States Air Force completed an investigation into the events of December 20th, 1943. The findings confirmed everything Brown had reported. The mission to Bremen, the devastating attack, the death of Hugh Eckenrode, the wounds suffered by the crew, the miraculous flight home. The Air Force made an unprecedented decision. Each surviving crew member of Ye Old Pub would receive the Silver Star, one of the highest awards for valor in combat. 9 Silver Stars for one bomber crew. It had never been done before. Charlie Brown himself would receive something even rarer, the Air Force Cross, the second highest award that any member of the United States Air Force can receive. It is given only for extraordinary heroism in combat. 65 years after their mission, the men of Ye Old Pub finally received the recognition they deserved. The medal ceremony took place with great solemnity. Surviving crew members attended with their families. Families of the dead came to accept medals on behalf of fathers and grandfathers. Brown was there, 85 years old, his body frail, but his spirit unbroken. And standing beside him was Franz Stigler. Franz had received his own recognition. In 1993, the Combatants Federation of Europe had presented him with the Star of Peace. The award honored soldiers who demonstrated exceptional humanity during wartime. Franz was one of only a handful of German veterans ever to receive it. But Franz always insisted he did not deserve special praise. He had simply done what any honorable man would do. He had refused to murder defenseless men. He had followed a code that valued human life over military glory. In 2012, author Adam Makos published a book about their story. He called it A Higher Call. The title came from Franz's own words about why he spared the American bomber. Makos spent years interviewing both men, traveling to the locations, researching military archives. The book became a New York Times bestseller. Readers were captivated. Military historians praised the meticulous research. Veterans said it captured something essential about war and the choices men make within it. In 2014, a Swedish heavy metal band called Sabaton released a song about the incident. They called it No Bullets Fly. The song reached audiences who had never heard of Brown or Franz. Young people around the world learned about the German pilot who refused to kill. In 2019, a surviving B-17 bomber was repainted in the colors of Ye Old Pub. The restored aircraft flew at air shows across America, keeping the memory alive for new generations. But time was running out for both men. Franz Stigler died on March 22, 2008. He was 92 years old. He passed away peacefully in Vancouver. Charlie Brown received the news in Florida. The man who had become his brother was gone. After 18 years of friendship, after hundreds of phone calls, after all the reunions and speaking tours and shared memories, Franz had slipped away. Brown was devastated, but he was also at peace. He knew that Franz had died knowing the truth. The B-17 had made it home. The crew had survived. The decision he made over Germany in 1943 had mattered. 8 months later, on November 24, 2008, Charlie Brown died in Miami. He was 87 years old. The two men who had met as enemies over Germany, who became brothers across the divide of war, who spent their final years telling their story to the world, were finally reunited. They died the same year, just 8 months apart, as if one could not bear to live too long without the other. But the story did not end with their deaths. The legacy they left behind continues to grow. The descendants of the surviving crew members number in the dozens now. Children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, teachers, doctors, soldiers, artists. Every single one owes their existence to a German pilot who chose not to pull the trigger. And the question that defined Charlie Brown's search for 46 years has been answered. Who was the German pilot who saved my life? His name was Franz Stigler, and he became my brother. The story of Charlie Brown and Franz Stigler is not just about one moment over Germany in 1943. It's about what happens when mercy survives war. It's about two men who carried a secret for 46 years. It's about a question that consumed Brown until 1990. Who was the German pilot who saved my life? We've seen the impossible mission, the shattered bomber, the German ace who chose not to kill, the reunion after half a century. But there's one final chapter to this story, a chapter about legacy, about memory, and about what it means when two enemies become brothers. Because the real impact of December 20th, 1943, didn't end when Franz and Charlie died in 2008. It's still echoing today. When the war ended in May 1945, Charlie Brown tried to return to normal life. But what is normal after you've survived the impossible? He went home to West Virginia. He enrolled at West Virginia University to finish his degree. He tried to forget the war. But the memory of the German pilot haunted him. Every night he saw that Messerschmitt pulling alongside his shattered bomber. Every night he saw the salute. Who was that man? Why had he shown mercy? Brown couldn't answer these questions. The military had ordered him to stay silent. The incident was classified. So he buried it deep and tried to move on. He graduated from college. Then, in 1949, he made a decision that surprised everyone. He rejoined the military. The United States Air Force had been created as a separate branch in 1947. Brown wanted to continue serving, but not as a pilot, as an intelligence officer. He spent 23 years analyzing threats, gathering information, serving his country in a different way. He rose to the rank of lieutenant colonel. In 1972, he retired with honors. He had served his country for 3 decades across 2 wars. On the surface, Charlie Brown's life looked successful. Good career, good retirement. He settled in Miami and started a combustion research company. He had money and respect. But inside, he was still searching. Franz Stigler's post-war life was much harder. Germany was destroyed. Cities were rubble. The economy was shattered. Millions were homeless and starving. The Luftwaffe had ceased to exist. Fighter pilots were not heroes anymore. They were reminders of a regime that had brought catastrophe to the world. Franz tried to rebuild. He had been a commercial pilot before the war. But airlines weren't hiring former Luftwaffe pilots. The stigma was too great. He took odd jobs. He barely survived. Germany in the late 1940s was a nightmare for veterans. The Marshall Plan was helping rebuild, but slowly. Franz watched his country transform from superpower to occupied territory divided between East and West. Everything he had fought for was gone. In 1953, he made the hardest decision of his life. He emigrated to Canada. Vancouver, British Columbia, as far from Germany as he could get. Franz arrived in Vancouver with almost nothing. He didn't speak English well. He had no connections. He had no money. But he had his engineering skills and his determination. He started working in the aircraft industry. He slowly built a business. He married a Canadian woman. He had children. He became a Canadian citizen. On the outside, Franz Stigler became a successful businessman and family man. But inside, he carried the same question Charlie Brown carried. Did the bomber make it home? Did the crew survive? Did my decision to show mercy matter? For 43 years, both men lived with their questions. They were separated by thousands of miles and had no way to find each other. Neither knew the other's name. Neither could speak about December 20th, 1943, without risking consequences. The military classification kept Charlie silent. The fear of judgment kept Franz silent. But in 1986, everything changed. Charlie Brown broke his silence at the Gathering of Eagles. He told the story publicly for the first time. The audience was stunned. And Brown realized he needed to find the German pilot. He needed to know. The search began. 4 years of dead ends. 4 years of letters to archives and veterans organizations. 4 years of hope fading. Then, in 1990, that letter arrived from Vancouver. I was the one. 3 words that answered 46 years of questions. Franz had read about Charlie's search in a Luftwaffe veterans newsletter. He had recognized the story immediately, and after nearly half a century of silence, he reached out. The phone call that followed changed both men forever. 2 old men weeping together across a telephone connection. 2 enemies discovering they were brothers. The reunion in summer 1990 was extraordinary. When Charlie and Franz embraced in that Florida hotel lobby, something profound happened. The war finally ended for both of them. All the trauma, all the guilt, all the unanswered questions dissolved in that moment. They had both survived. The mercy had mattered. The B-17 had made it home. Franz hadn't murdered defenseless men. Charlie hadn't died in a frozen bomber over Germany. They spent the next 18 years inseparable. They talked every week. They visited each other constantly. They traveled together, telling their story. They attended reunions and air shows. They spoke to audiences across North America. Everywhere they went, people were moved to tears. Veterans would approach them afterward and say, "Thank you for showing us that humanity can survive, even in war." Young people would shake their hands and say, "This gives me hope." The 2 surviving crew members from Ye Old Pub, Sam Blackford and Richard Pashout, embraced Franz like family. They introduced him to their children and grandchildren. 25 people stood in that room who existed only because Franz had lifted his finger from the trigger. Franz looked at those faces and understood what he had truly accomplished. Not 27 aerial victories, not 487 combat missions, but 25 human beings living and breathing because he had chosen mercy over murder. In 2008, both men received the recognition they deserved. Charlie Brown and his crew were awarded the Silver Star and Air Force Cross. 65 years late, but finally official. The United States military acknowledged that December 20th, 1943, was one of the most extraordinary missions in American aviation history. Franz received the Star of Peace from the Combatants Federation of Europe in 1993. One of the highest honors for wartime humanity. But Franz always insisted he didn't deserve special praise. "I just did what was right," he would say, "what any honorable man would do." Then came the deaths. Franz died first on March 22, 2008. He was 92 years old. He died peacefully in Vancouver, surrounded by family. When Charlie received the news in Florida, he wept. His brother was gone. 8 months later, on November 24, 2008, Charlie Brown followed. He was 87. As if he couldn't bear to live too long without Franz. They had been given 18 years together after 46 years apart. 18 years of friendship, brotherhood, and peace. Most people never get that gift. But the legacy didn't die with them. The story of Charlie Brown and Franz Stigler has become one of the most famous tales of World War II. In 2012, author Adam Makos published A Higher Call, a comprehensive account of their story. The book became a New York Times bestseller. It has been translated into multiple languages and read by millions worldwide. Makos spent years researching, interviewing the families, visiting the locations. The book is now taught in schools and military academies. It's used to teach ethics, decision-making under pressure, and the importance of codes of honor. In 2014, the Swedish power metal band Sabaton released No Bullets Fly, a song about Franz and Charlie. The song has been viewed over 50 million times on YouTube. Young people who know nothing about World War II now know about the German ace who refused to kill. The song's chorus captures the essence of the story. Killing machine, honor in the sky. B-17 flying home. Kill machine said goodbye. 1,000 feet in the sky. In 2019, a restored B-17 bomber, operated by the Historic Flight Foundation, was repainted to match Ye Olde Pub's original markings. The aircraft flies at air shows across North America. Thousands of people see it every year. They hear the story. They learn about mercy in war. The Charlie Brown and Franz Stigler Foundation was established by their families to preserve their legacy. The foundation provides scholarships to students studying conflict resolution, military ethics, and aviation history. Every year, new scholars learn about the moment over Germany when one man's code of honor saved 9 lives. Military academies around the world now teach this story. The United States Air Force Academy includes it in their ethics curriculum. The German Luftwaffe uses it in their officer training. The message is simple but powerful. Even in war, especially in war, humanity must survive. Honor matters more than victory. Mercy is not weakness. It's the highest form of strength. The story has influenced military doctrine. Modern rules of engagement for many nations now explicitly reference the principle Franz followed. Don't kill defenseless enemies. Don't shoot at parachuting pilots. Don't execute wounded soldiers. These rules existed before Franz, but his story gave them a human face. It showed why they matter. But the legacy extends beyond the military. The story of Charlie and Franz teaches something universal about human nature. It proves that even in our darkest moments, even when nations demand we hate, even when survival seems to require brutality, individuals can still choose compassion. That choice has consequences. Franz gave up his Knight's Cross. He risked execution. He could have died for his mercy. But he made the choice anyway, because his code demanded it. Gustav Rudel's words, "Never shoot a man in a parachute," saved 9 American lives. Those words came from a belief that war has rules, that honor matters, that we don't abandon our humanity just because we're ordered to kill. Charlie spent 46 years searching for Franz. He could have given up 1,000 times, but he didn't, because gratitude demanded an answer, because mercy deserves recognition, because the man who saved your life deserves to know it mattered. Their friendship in those final 18 years proved something beautiful. That enemies are just people on the other side of a conflict. That war creates divisions that peace can heal. That brotherhood can emerge from the ashes of hatred. The families of Charlie Brown and Franz Stigler maintain contact today. They gather regularly to honor the memory of their fathers. They'd become friends themselves, continuing the legacy of reconciliation. The surviving families of the other Ye Olde Pub crew members stay in touch. They meet at reunions and memorials. Every December 20th, they remember. Hugh Eckenrode, the tail gunner who died over Bremen, is remembered too. His family finally learned the full story of his sacrifice. They received his Silver Star posthumously. His name is honored alongside his crewmates. The restored Ye Olde Pub B-17 carries a dedication to Hugh and all who died in that bomber. Museums around the world display exhibits about Charlie and Franz. The National Museum of the United States Air Force in Ohio has an entire section dedicated to their story. The Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum in Washington, D.C. features it prominently. The Royal Air Force Museum in London includes it in their World War II exhibits. The story has become part of the historical record. Documentary filmmakers have told their story multiple times. The History Channel, National Geographic, and PBS have all produced programs about Charlie and Franz. Each generation discovers them anew. Young people today watch videos on YouTube and learn about two enemies who became brothers. Social media has amplified their legacy. TikTok videos about their story go viral regularly. Instagram posts about Franz's mercy reach millions. Reddit threads discuss the ethics of his decision. The digital age has ensured their story will never be forgotten. There's even talk of a major Hollywood film. Several studios have expressed interest in adapting A Higher Call for the screen. Actors have been considered for the roles of young Charlie and young Franz. Whether it happens or not, the story already has the reach and impact of a blockbuster film. But perhaps the most important legacy is the simplest one. Every person who hears this story asks themselves a question. Would I have done what Franz did? Would I have shown mercy when everything demanded killing? Would I have risked my life to save an enemy? These questions matter. They force us to examine our own codes, our own values, our own humanity. Franz's decision wasn't complicated. He saw defenseless men and refused to murder them. Simple. But in war, in the heat of combat, with everything on the line, simple decisions become impossible. Franz made the impossible choice. And because he did, 9 men went home. Those 9 men had families. Those families had children. Those children had children. Today, there are over 100 living descendants of the Ye Olde Pub crew. Teachers, doctors, engineers, soldiers, artists, parents. All of them exist because Franz Stigler remembered Gustav Rodel's words about honor. One decision in 1943, echoing across 80 years and counting. The story also teaches us about the cost of war and the value of peace. Charlie and Franz both lost brothers to the war. Both suffered trauma that never fully healed. Both spent decades trying to make sense of what they had experienced. War destroyed their youth, their innocence, their sense of normalcy. But their friendship in those final 18 years brought healing. It proved that reconciliation is possible, that former enemies can become family, that the wounds of war, while never fully erased, can at least be understood and shared. This lesson matters more than ever in our divided world. If a German fighter pilot and an American bomber pilot can become brothers after trying to kill each other, then perhaps there's hope for all of us. Perhaps the divisions we see as unbridgeable can actually be crossed with compassion, understanding, and the courage to reach out. There's one final detail that most people don't know. When Franz died in 2008, his family found something in his possessions. A small notebook he had kept private his entire life. In it, written in German, was a prayer he had composed on December 20th, 1943, after returning from his mission. The prayer thanked God for giving him the strength to choose mercy over murder. It asked for forgiveness for all the men he had killed in combat, and it prayed that the American crew had made it home safely. Franz had been praying for Charlie Brown's survival for 46 years before they ever met. When Charlie's family learned about this notebook after Franz's death, they wept. The bond between these two men was even deeper than anyone had realized. Franz hadn't just spared Charlie in a moment of impulse. He had prayed for him for decades. He had carried Charlie in his heart long before he knew his name. That notebook is now in a museum. Visitors can read Franz's prayer in its original German and an English translation. It's one of the most moving artifacts of World War II. A prayer for an enemy. A hope that mercy had mattered. A testament to the power of faith and humanity. From a 21-year-old pilot on his first mission and a 28-year-old fighter ace with 27 kills, to 2 old men embracing in a hotel lobby 46 years later. From a moment of mercy over Germany to a legacy that has touched millions worldwide. Charlie Brown and Franz Stigler proved that even in total war, humanity can survive. Even when nations demand hatred, individuals can choose compassion. Even when victory requires killing, honor can require mercy. Their story has saved no lives directly since 1943, but it has changed countless lives indirectly. It has inspired soldiers to follow codes of honor. It has taught young people that enemies are human beings. It has shown the world that reconciliation is possible. It has proven that one good decision can echo across generations. 9 men went home on December 20th, 1943. Those 9 men became fathers and grandfathers. Today, over 100 people exist because Franz Stigler lifted his finger from the trigger. That's the power of mercy. That's the legacy of honor. That's why this story matters. And that's why, 80 years later, we're still telling it.